The secret to success in life is sincerity. Once you can fake that, you've got it made. That was the philosophy of Victor Lustig, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal. Twice, you see. Lustig's con has impacted how we understand confidence, persuasion, and the psychology of fraud. Things that still impact business today. Lustig was so skilled at deception that he conned Al Capone, swindled banks across Europe, and convinced the French government itself that he had authority to demolish their most famous landmark. Now, many of you already know that con artists exist. However, there is a good chance you re-underestimating just how systematically great salesmanship and social engineering can convince rational people to make insane decisions. I mean, Lustig himself said, a hungry man is easier to persuade than a satisfied one. It just goes to show that he knew very early on that understanding human psychology was more valuable than any product, and that confidence plus a good story could sell literally anything. From selling the Eiffel Tower to counterfeiting millions in fake dollars, Victor Lustig is undeniably one of the greatest con artists in history. Now, our story begins with Victor Lustig. He was a man of mysterious origins. However, he was brilliantly intelligent and understood human nature better than any psychologist. He was born in 1890 in Hostin, a small town in what is now the Czech Republic, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His real name was probably Victor Lustig, though he used at least 47 aliases throughout his career. Not much is known about his early life because Lustig lied about everything, even his own biography. What we do know is that he was educated, spoke 5 languages fluently, German, French, English, Italian, and Czech, and had a scar on his left cheek from a fight over a woman which he claimed came from a duel. The scar became part of his mystique, making him seem dangerous and aristocratic. Life for Lustig would have been comfortable as a legitimate businessman. However, things changed dramatically when he discovered that people were far easier to deceive than he'd imagined. You see, in his early 20s, Lustig worked as a con man on ocean liners, traveling between Europe and America. These ships were filled with wealthy passengers, and Lustig posed as a count, a businessman, or whatever role suited his mark. He ran a con called the Money Box, where he would show a victim a mysterious box that supposedly used chemistry and radiation to duplicate $100 bills. He'd demonstrate it working perfectly, sell the box for $10,000 or more, and by the time the victim realized the box only produced a preloaded fake bills, Lustig was long gone. This con worked because Lustig understood greed. Show someone a way to print money, and they stopped thinking rationally. Now, in this criminal world, one of his first major successes came in 1922 when he conned Al Capone, the most dangerous gangster in America. Lustig approached Capone in Chicago and asked for $50,000 to invest in a coin-lose business deal. Capone, who didn't trust anyone, agreed but warned Lustig that if he was lying, he'd be killed. Lustig took the $50,000, put it in a safe deposit box, and did absolutely nothing with it for 2 months. Then he returned to Capone, looking devastated, claiming the deal had fallen through. He returned the full $50,000, apologizing for wasting Capone's time. Capone was so impressed by Lustig's honesty that he gave him $5,000 as a reward for being trustworthy. That was Lustig's plan all along. He understood that the best way to con someone is to make them think you're honest. Capone became a reference for Lustig's future cons, telling people, "That Lustig guy is straight." By 1920, Lustig had moved to Paris, and he was about to pull off the greatest con in history. You see, Lustig read in the newspaper that the Eiffel Tower, built for the 1889 World's Fair, was becoming expensive to maintain. The tower was only supposed to be temporary, and some Parisians wanted it demolished. The article mentioned that the 7,000 tons of iron were worth a fortune as scrap metal. To most Paris, this was just news. To Lustig, it was opportunity. He immediately conceived a plan so audacious that nobody would suspect it was fake precisely because it was too crazy to be a lie. Lustig had fake government stationery printed, identifying himself as the Deputy Director General of the Ministère des Postes et Télégraphes, the government department that managed the Eiffel Tower. He rented a suite at the prestigious Hotel de Crillon, one of Paris's most expensive hotels. Then he sent official-looking letters to 5 of the biggest scrap metal dealers in Paris, inviting them to a confidential government meeting at the hotel. The letters were marked confidential and warned that absolute secrecy was required because the government had yet announced publicly that the Eiffel Tower would be demolished. The 5 scrap dealers arrived at the Crillon in May 1925, excited and nervous. Lustig, dressed impeccably and playing the role of bored bureaucrat perfectly, explained that the French government had decided the Eiffel Tower was too expensive to maintain and had become an eyesore. It would be demolished, and the scrap metal would be sold to the highest bidder. He took them on a tour of the tower in a rented limousine, pointing out the structure's iron beams and calculating the tonnage. The dealers were salivating. 7,000 tons of iron represented millions of francs in profit. But here's where Lustig's genius really showed. You see, while the other dealers were focused on calculating profits, Lustig was profiling them. He identified the weakest mark on André Poisson, a scrap dealer who was insecure about his social status. Poisson was from the provinces, not old Parisian aristocracy, and desperately wanted to prove himself among the Parisian elite. Lustig sensed this insecurity and exploited it ruthlessly. He invited Poisson to a private follow-up meeting at the hotel. During this meeting, Lustig did something unexpected. He acted nervous, uncomfortable, and dropped hints that he was underpaid as a government official. Finally, he admitted, with apparent shame, that he would need a bribe to guarantee Poisson would win the contract. This was the master. Poisson's doubts evaporated. Of course, a corrupt government official would demand a bribe. That's how things worked in France. The bribe made the whole scam feel legitimate. Poisson agreed immediately. Desperate to secure the deal and terrified someone else might outbid him, he paid Lustig approximately 250,000 francs, roughly $1 million today, for the Eiffel Tower contract, plus a substantial bribe to guarantee his selection. Lustig took the money and immediately left Paris with his accomplice, a conman called Dapper Don Collins. They fled to Vienna and waited nervously for the inevitable explosion when Poisson discovered he'd been conned. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing happened. No police investigation, no newspaper scandal, no arrest warrants. What Lustig didn't know was that Poisson was so humiliated and embarrassed that he never reported the crime. Admitting he'd tried to bribe a government official to buy the Eiffel Tower for demolition would have destroyed his reputation and possibly led to his own prosecution. So Poisson ate the loss, told nobody, and prayed the story would never become public. When Lustig realized Poisson hadn't gone to the police, he made an astonishing decision. He returned to Paris and ran the exact same con again, with a different group of scrap metal dealers. This time, he sold the Eiffel Tower to a different victim for an even larger sum. But the second victim wasn't as embarrassed as Poisson. He went to the police immediately. Lustig barely escaped Paris ahead of the authorities, fleeing back to America. The French police were too embarrassed to publicize that someone had sold their most famous landmark twice, so they buried the story. For decades, the con was known only in criminal circles. Lustig became a legend among con artists, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice. But Lustig wasn't finished. Back in America during the 1930s, he partnered with a counterfeiter named William Watts and began producing fake $100 bills. The counterfeits were nearly perfect, almost indistinguishable from real currency. Lustig passed millions of dollars in fake bills across America. He became one of the Secret Service's most wanted criminals. In 1935, after a decade of counterfeiting, Lustig was finally caught in New York City. A former girlfriend, angry after an argument, tipped off the police. He was arrested with $51,000 in counterfeit bills in his apartment. Lustig was tried and convicted of counterfeiting in 1935. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison and sent to Alcatraz, the maximum security prison on an island off San Francisco. Even in Alcatraz, Lustig tried to escape, but the plan failed. He served 12 years before dying of pneumonia in 1947 at the age of 57. He died in prison, penniless, having conned millions but kept nothing. The money was always just the scorecard for Lustig. The real thrill was the con itself, the psychological game of manipulating people. So what's the secret to Lustig's success? I think it's several things working together. First, he understood social proof and authority. By renting luxury hotels and printing official stationery, he made himself credible. People assume expensive settings equal legitimacy. Second, he exploited urgency and secrecy. The confidential government meeting created FOMO and prevented victims from researching or asking questions. Third, he profiled his victims ruthlessly, identifying insecurities and exploiting them. Poisson's status anxiety made him the perfect mark. Fourth, the bribe was genius. By acting corrupt himself, Lustig made the scam feel real. We expect government officials to be corrupt, so the bribe confirmed Poisson's worldview. And fifth, Lustig understood that embarrassment prevents victims from reporting fraud. Poisson couldn't admit he'd been fooled without destroying himself. But we have to ask ourselves, what does this teach us about business and persuasion? Lustig's techniques aren't just criminal tactics. They're sales and marketing strategies used every day, creating urgency through limited time offers, building authority through branding and credentials, identifying customer pain points and exploiting them, using social proof and testimonials. These are legitimate business tactics, but they're also manipulation. If you've made it this far, leave an Eiffel Tower emoji in the comments. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Also, check out my video on how luxury brands manipulate you. Another story of psychological manipulation for profit. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.